There are few things more frustrating and more annoying than when you bring a guest onto your show. You're excited to dive into a conversation with them, and that guest falls so flat that it impacts the actual viability of the show itself. And then you're left as a host wondering, do I even air this episode? Well, that's what we're going to dive in today. We're going to be chatting about how you, as a potential guest for a show, can actually show up and shine as a guest on a show to be the type of guest that hosts want to have back, that help hosts feel so confident in their episodes that they cannot wait to share those episodes with their audiences. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we're going to be diving into that. Are you tired of the endless stream of fantasy marketing and vanity metrics? Yeah, so am I. My name is James Patrick, and I'm an internationally published photographer, media specialist, and marketing strategist. I'm also a student of professional development, and like you, I've been left frustrated by all of this influencer-driven generic advice, making us think that we are just one course, conference, or manifestation away from the life of our dreams. We need to cut through this crap and move beyond the posturing, beyond the facade, beyond the image, to take real action on the real work that will create the real results. This is the Beyond the Image podcast. My guest today is the host of the On Air with Ella podcast, Ella herself. How you doing today?
Hey, James. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining. So this topic came up. You and I were having a conversation about our conference, and we were just kind of chatting about podcasting and bringing guests on the shows and how frustrating it is when we have someone on the show who, well, it really makes us question whether or not we can air this episode. And I want to kind of give some background of that. How long have you been podcasting for?
8 years, James. And I've made every mistake in the book as both a podcaster and a guest. So I've earned the right to talk about it.
Oh, both sides of it. Okay. Oh, I'm curious because as a guest, I'm infallible. I'm batting 1,000. I have yet to mess. Although I have had episodes where I was a guest that did not air. But I assume that was the host's fault. That can't be.
Oh, probably a glitch. Probably a glitch, James.
Computer connection. What was it that kind of led you into podcasting?
Honestly, I've had a consulting business for a very long time, corporate stuff, pretty dry. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't all sides of me, if you will. And I've always been really interested in wellness and had my own sort of fitness journey and that sort of thing. And got obsessed, as one does, with that topic back in the day, probably 9 years ago. And I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to make wellness really easy. Now, the show has evolved since then, but to answer your question, I was bitten by the bug and wanted to share a message. Like, I was really passionate about how we complicate these things and people are selling you snake oil and it's actually really simple. And I fell in love with the medium. And then I wanted to bring my message via expert guests to that medium. So it was a combination of factors, but I really fell in love with podcasting back when it was still kind of new to the masses.
Yeah, it was about 10 years ago for myself as well. And it was the same thing. It was such a new medium because prior to that, I mean, YouTube existed, but not to it wasn't being leveraged the way it's being leveraged now, which is a lot by podcasters or content creators. So you had blogging, and that was really about it when it came to a content distribution strategy. So this idea of curating a show, we were kind of going in blind, 8-10 years ago, not knowing. Like, I remember I didn't know how to make my microphones work. So I had to walk into a Guitar Center and be like, here's what I'm trying to do. And he literally drew on a piece of notebook paper what my problems were with my microphones and my settings. Now I could, look that up on YouTube in 20 seconds. But that was just an example of this. There was not a script for us to create this, but this industry evolved pretty rapidly over 10 years. And now I feel it's so critically important. It's such a versatile medium. It's such a highly consumed medium. And that has made it so important for us as hosts to ensure that we have good productions? I mean, what are some of the things that you've kind of picked up as a host and as a producer in this time?
Yeah, well, I have to say, I mean, first of all, you were in the game 10 years ago, I was in the game 8 years ago, and I had to explain what a podcast was. That was that was one of our biggest hurdles. It's like it's a show, but you stream it, but it's on the internet. It's like the radio. But I mean, do you remember those days?
Well, I remember like the inability, like, I mean, you're what, Florida, I'm in Phoenix, and this was not possible 8 years ago when I had to interview someone in another place. I had to drive out to them with my little briefcase of podcast gear in order to make that happen.
James, I'm in DC, but I have to
Oh,
say,
DC, yeah.
so much like Florida, they often get confused. But the other thing is, to your point, James, there's so much more competition now, is one way to say it. But podcasts are so much more prevalent than they used to be, obviously, right? But the
Mhm.
thing is, in order to stand out, in order to cut through that noise, you need to be excellent, especially if you're an independent podcaster. And that is something that I am so passionate about. So I hope that we're talking today both to people who are creating, but also people who want to be interviewed, who want to be a guest on other people's podcasts, because I think that just table stakes now are that you got to be an A plus, right? No one's going to sit around and listen to a C minus anymore, like they might have back in the day.
Well, and I think to add to that, even if I really like a show, and I'll give an example. There's a music show I am obsessed with. Every episode, I have to, as soon as it comes out, it is on my playlist on that day. But the episodes are broken out into two parts. You have the front half of the show, which is the host doing a monologue. The back half of the show is the interview. Now, I've listened to 100% of this show's monologues. I've listened to less than 25% of his
Oof.
interviews.
Oof.
And that's not because he's a bad interviewer. So if he's running ads on that second half of his show, which I know he is, the amount of money he's able to make off those ads is plummeting because of the guests. Like
Mm.
that right there, even though I love this show and I support the show so much, I even bought his book on pre-sale. I was so excited to be a patron of his ideology, but I cannot put up with having my time wasted by a bad interview.
Mm-mm. It's actually painful. It's painful to listen to two people struggling to either build rapport, build a connection, or honestly, it's such an intimate medium that you can feel the awkwardness if somebody is even remotely uncomfortable. Does that make sense
Mhm.
to you?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think so much of this starts with, I mean, one, a good host is going to manage a show,
for
but
sure.
if you're a guest on a podcast where even the host is inexperienced, we're still going to run into some issues because you still need to be able to show up, and in fact, you need to show up even more so in order for your message to be heard, because if I'm a fan of a host, I'm going to put up with a host's, you know, inexperience. I'm going to tolerate because I love the host. Maybe I saw him on Instagram, or, I followed him on YouTube, or wherever I came across him. I'm just into this individual. So I'm going to put up with his inabilities. But if he brings on a guest who's also an experience, like now I'm really kind of struggling to get through. And I think so much of this starts before someone's ever on a show. I think this kind of builds into like what we're doing before the cameras are on or before the mics are on.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely critical, and I think a lot of people skip this step. So, there are so many people out here, this is true in public speaking as well, James, and they're just winging it because A, maybe they have a really strong personality, and B, maybe they have a really strong message and a strong story, and that's all fantastic. But when
Mhm.
you're winging it, you're really centering you. You are not centering the audience. And the best speakers in the world, whether it's behind the mic or not, they are centering the audience. In other words, what value can I create for the listener today in the podcast world, which is so different than how can I showcase my personality today or some other version of that.
You hit the nail on the head, and I think this is why this is important, Ella, is because this is how you get on the show to begin with.
Yeah.
When someone comes to me and says, "I'd like to be a guest on your show," if that's it, that's about where the conversation concludes. But when someone comes to me, and to be clear, like, 2 examples of a pitch. One pitch is, and I get these all the time, which is this long resume of accolades and
Yeah.
achievements. Let me know if you'd like me to be on your show. That doesn't help me. I don't I don't know how to extract something from this resume and determine what from this resume is good for my audience. Now you're asking me to do work. Well, I'm really busy. I don't want to do that work. But if you came to me and said, this is exactly what I can talk about on your
Mhm.
show, I can determine immediately, does this benefit my audience or does this not benefit my audience? And that's a half second decision. I don't care about your resume. I assume if you are asked, or if you're saying you can talk about something, I just believe you. Yeah, you could probably talk about that because you're saying you can talk about it. I don't need this overindulged long email just dissertating out why you are the person to chat about this, even if I can find that within this long email.
Yeah, and I want to be really clear. I think that it is absolutely acceptable, even encouraged, to decide what a desirable outcome for you as a guest is going to be. But first, what outcome are you creating for the listener? And by the way,
Mhm.
to your point, James, that's how you get on a show is you share what outcome you're going to create for the listener. That's what the host cares about. They don't care that you went to Harvard and now and your accolades and your resume, all of the things that you've already said so well, James. So, what outcome are you going to create for the listener? If you're trying to pitch, start there and almost finish there. When it comes to you, and let's assume you've said yes, 100% you should ask and answer what is a desirable outcome for me. So there are tons of answers to this. One is I want to connect with this host and I want to build a relationship there, and I intend to do that by adding value for his or her audience. Another reason is I have a funnel for my coaching business,
Mhm.
and I want to spread the word so that I start to have credibility as a coach. I'm sure a lot of your listeners can identify with that, or a photographer, etc. Like I want to showcase my work. There's nothing wrong with having a self-serving objective. That's why we
Mhm.
do most things in the professional realm. I am just suggesting that we first start with the outcome and the experience that we're creating for those who are about to consume this.
This is very similar, in fact, parallel to whenever I'm presenting to speak at a conference. So I just went through this process recently where I had to fill out this application, and the first thing it asks is, after the name and all that, what is the outcome? What are we delivering for the audience, and what bullet points can you give on deliverables that this audience is going to walk away with? That's the part I spent the most time on, because that's the point I wanted to drill home. Like, when people walk away, like, I know when I get up on that stage that I'm going to impart so much value to this audience that they're going to buy something from me at the back of the room. That's why I'm applying for this. But I need to earn the right to get on that stage. And that's
Mm,
by showing this conference host what these attendees are going to walk away with that they would not if I was not on that stage.
100%.
Yeah. So that kind of gets us into, all right, yes, I want you on the show. What are ways that we can help ensure that we are effective during the process of the
Mhm.
recording, as well as like establishing that rapport with that host, because that's part of it too.
Okay, I have to say, and I don't know if some of this is just my opinion. Okay,
Mhm.
so some of these, like I'll die on that hill, and but the following are just some best practices that I have found make a difference. So, if if you are going to pitch yourself to be on someone's show, or if you have a relationship with them and it comes up organically, whatever the case may be, connect with that person on social media, like listen to their show, find out what they're about, find out who they're talking to, consume their content, understand the tone of the show. This is so critical. You should not show up to every dance you're invited to, right? Just because someone says they will have you on their air, which is exciting always. It's never not exciting. Just because they said yes doesn't mean it's a great idea. Ideally, you would have, if you're the one pitching, you would have done some of this homework in advance, obviously. But
Mhm.
before you get on somebody's airways and you use some of their real estate, make sure you're aligned a little bit, or at least not grossly misaligned. And also, connecting on social media has lots of practical uses and that sort of thing, but you really get a feel for their voice. I mean, you and I, before I, I don't know if this is fair because you and I have like 10 different topics that we can talk about at any given moment. But the moment we started talking about your show, I connected to every single thing that you're doing, everything that you're doing, because I want to know your audience before I have the privilege of speaking to them. So again, that is something that I think a lot of people sort of just take for granted, or they connect after the fact so that they can hype their show, cross promote their show. But I believe in relationships and I believe in rapport building. And so I highly recommend that you connect with them in all the ways that are available to you. And James, there are some practical things too, like ask them who their audience is, ask them if their show is edited, ask them if they're using video. Like these are things, as a host, you're probably very accustomed to sharing with people. But if you're working with someone who's newer, who's less experienced, they might not provide that information up front. That's just some brass tack stuff.
And so much of this is still fairly new, like the whole idea that, video is such an option. Like several years ago, it was an option, but it wasn't as frequent, it wasn't as common. 2020 really
Mm.
shifted that around. I'm of the stance, I don't know if I care if someone listens to my show before being a guest on it. We get a lot of like the PR round guests where it's
Mhm.
just like I'm circling this book, and I know the game. Like it is a numbers game, and I just have to determine, is the content of this book or their message worth it to my audience to have them on to pitch their book. And if it is, great. They're never going to listen. Or if we have a celebrity on, they're never going to listen to the show. But if you're an entrepreneur or you're someone who sees an opportunity to leverage my audience, or Ella, your audience, what you said, I love, which is like, look them up and get a sense of tone. You're going to get so much like clarity just looking at my Instagram, like in 5 seconds of who I am, what my ethos is, what my
Mhm.
energy is like. And same with yours, Ella. Like it's very clear to know who you are, what you stand for, what you agree with, what you disagree with, just by digging through a few seconds of your social media, so that when they do connect with you, because sometimes it's the first time you've ever seen them face to face, or, screen to
Mm.
screen. It's like, okay, you're not just a stranger that I haven't met before. And now we can start to develop a little bit more of this conversation.
Yeah, you are pointing out a reality, and I want to peel that back a minute because I have a real life story that supports what you just said. And you're right, that is the reality of it. The bigger the name or the book or whatever their platform is, they are not going to do their research on you. If they have a good assistant, then their assistant will and give them like 10 seconds worth of information about you before they go on. But let's assume that they do not. I threw away. I wonder if I should drop the name. I'll drop the name. I don't think he'd be offended. But James Clear is really well known to a lot of people. He wrote Atomic
Mhm.
Habits. He sold somewhere between 10 million and 5 billion copies. James, I didn't look it up. Okay.
A lot.
And something more than 5. And that book was hugely successful. And I've probably hyped it on the air no fewer than 10 times, right? Because I actually, like, a lot of that stuff is bunk. I really respected that book and I used it almost like a manual and I went back to
Mhm.
it. And that's how you know a book is good. Okay. Great. So I got the interview. I was happy, and James is a really intelligent person and he does great interviews. I got James, poor James. He's going to be so sad when he does hear this. I got James. I must have been interview 15 that day. I mean, the man was tired. And he was really rote. And he doesn't know that on my show, I bring an energy to it, and I'm a little bit cheeky, and I like to have fun with things because I don't want to, I'm not here to bore anybody. And he did not know that, did not get briefed on me in any way, because he fits the profile you're describing, James. And the interview, despite what I have to say, was a real effort on my part. It was like listening to somebody floss. Like it was sad. And I threw it out. So I had this great interview with a great name that would have been, highly clickable and pulled me up in search, I'm sure, for at least, some measure of time. And I binned it because my audience deserves better than that. So just you are 100% right. For those of us who can spend the 65 seconds that it takes, I'm recommending that we take it.
It's so the back of the voice in the back of the mind of my listeners is saying, well, why didn't she just air it? Like that, as she said, that could have helped her SEO. That could have, she could have got a lot of downloads. Yes, but they never would have listened again, because they wouldn't have blamed James for the bad episode.
Oh, you're so right.
They would have blamed you for the bad episode, and you'll never get that listener back. Like I listened to, and I'm okay throwing him under the bus because I don't know him. I listened to one episode of Lewis Howes, School of Greatness. I mean, his podcast, I would, punch strangers to get the numbers he gets. I listened to one episode, and the tagline of the episode was the 5 things you need to achieve XYZ. Doesn't matter. This is why I tuned into this episode. And he did what some hosts do, which is he teased it constantly. And the guest kept trying to get it out. Like, well, here, let's talk about the first thing. He's like, well, before we get to that first thing, let me take you on this other round the world trip. And let's talk about your experience in college. Okay, well, now we talked about that. So the first thing I want to talk about is, well, actually, before we get to that, let me dive you into this other realm here. And
I'm killing me.
I'm 50 minutes into this damn episode. I'm just like, I can't do this. I no longer care. And I've never listened to another one of his episodes, despite all the amazing guests he's had and all the success he's had. It just, for me, not working. I'm out because of that interview. Now, I blame the host for that. If I air a bad episode, I run the risk of losing my audience. And once I lose them, it's not like social media where it's so fleeting and you could get people back fairly easily. You lose someone on a podcast, like they have to go out of their way to find you again. That's
and
a
why
lot
would
of
they?
effort.
And why
There's
would
too
they?
many other
They have
options.
so many options.
Yes. And it's not like on Instagram where everything's short form content. Like if I follow and unfollow you, who cares? Like it's just content. I unfollow and follow people all the time. But podcasts, like I have to dedicate my time to this. This is 30 minutes of my day.
You're touching on something that is really important to me, and I think it will resonate with people who really love this medium. And that is that respect the medium, like respect the intimacy of podcasting, respect that this is a conversation with 3 people. Now, humor me here. Yes, you can have more than one host, but let's just say for anecdotal purposes, we have a host, we have a guest, and we have the person who just puts you in their ears and is devoting 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour of their life to sit at that table with you, metaphorically. So this is a conversation between 3 people. If you had 3 people sitting around the table, which is how I encourage everyone to think about their podcasts as they're creating them or guesting on them. If you have 3 people sitting around the table and one of them was speaking the way you're saying Howes was speaking, you would throw something at them. Like that is not a natural, organic way of you'd be like, who invited this guy? You know what I mean? there goes Lewis as your next guest, by the way. I'm so sorry, James. But here's the takeaway, I think that if we respect the intimacy of this medium, it changes the game in terms of the content that you create and the value that you add, the energy that you bring when you're a guest. It is you and 2 other people, full stop.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think even as hosts, sometimes it's easy to forget that we're not just talking out into a void. That's not just an empty space across my desk when I'm speaking, and I'm not just looking into an empty camera lens. That if I'm not creating something of value, there's that's where it ends right there. And I think, social media has really, I think, reinforced this, where if I'm not leading with something that my audience is going to grasp onto on my social media account, there's no reason for them to engage with my content. So take what happens on social media. And if you're pissed off and you're blaming the algorithm, you can't blame the algorithm on your podcast. People are just not liking your content. There is no algorithm preventing whether or not people are served it. They just chose not to listen to it. And that's something we really have to take into account.
Can I build on that with two just practical tips? Because I love to just
Yeah.
boil it down to like, okay, so what? What do I do? One is, if you have insights, and by the way, if you're a solo podcaster always, then you are your own guest. Okay. So this
Mhm.
applies to you when you're guesting, and it applies to you when you're solo podcasting. Try to convert the points that you want to make. Let's say you have 3 key points, 3 insights you want to share on that episode. Try to convert them into stories. Try to convert them into examples. Try to take each one, which is perfectly acceptable to share them in plain English, but then try to come up with an anecdote, an example, a story, however brief, about each one, because in this medium, storytelling makes it real. It's not a stage. It's not a PowerPoint presentation. So it's not, James, please tell me the 3 ways you think entrepreneurs should build their business in 30 days. Like, that's great and useful information, but it could have been an email. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So when you share your own stories as an entrepreneur, which you do very effectively, when you build out those insights, it's rich. Suddenly it's a story. Suddenly it's a conversation around that table. So the takeaway there is to, yes, come up with the things you want to hit on, come up with your insights, the gems, the reason you're there, but try to build an example of this in real life, of this in action, of a time you did this or didn't do this.
I love this example, and I'll tell you why. I had a guest on back in 2020, and the reason I said yes to this guest was because they came to me with a format, and I liked the format. It was an acronym. Here's my marketing strategy. It breaks into, I think there's 7 parts to it, and it's a word, and every letter is a step we need to take in our marketing. I'm like, great. So I now know the outline of this show. So
Yeah.
let's jump on. Let's record this show, and it was the most boring, monotonous. Like I remember, like, my wife was downstairs, and all she could hear was my end of it, and she's just like, was that the most boring interview you've ever done in your life? And I'm like, yeah, I can't air it. And I was trying to figure out why. Why was this interview so obnoxiously boring and awful? And it was because that's all there was her points. It was, M stands for this.
It was a
Okay.
PowerPoint presentation.
Yes. A stands for this. R stands for this. K stands for this. And I, as a host, I literally was like, all right, what does K stand for? Okay.
You're
What does
like,
E
just go
stand
on.
for?
Tell
That
me.
was my transitions. That was how bad it got. It never aired, and I don't think she ever looked to see if it aired. But it was because, like, had she filled every one of those things with a small story or anecdote or narrative or example, all of a sudden now she's drawing the audience in and inviting them to be a part of this like really creative process.
Yeah, and I just want to say, if you're a podcaster or a content creator in any way, and this happens to, if that happens to you, you do not have to air it. Like, I just want to drive that point home. I know we already
Mhm.
talked about it, but you made the right decision, James.
Yeah, I think in 10 years there've only been 2 episodes that did not go to air. That
Mm.
was one of them. The other was the jackass their phone kept going off, and like 3
Oof.
times. 3 times their phone went off. And this is not a celebrity. This is not someone who, they're not that important. And at one point they forgot what they were saying because they had to check their phone and asked me to remind them about what they were talking about after they interrupted the show. That one didn't go to air just because I was pissed. But let's set that aside. It's kind of like, pod therapy. We kind of like air our grievances. My name is James. I'm a podcaster. I had one bad guest this week.
I'll tell you something that your boring lady did right. She did one
Please.
thing right, she just didn't deliver, right? One
Yeah.
thing that she did right that I encourage everyone to do is to send your outline, even your desired questions to the host in advance. Is it necessary? No. Will some of them ignore it? Absolutely 100%. Why is it useful? Several reasons. If you know what you want to contribute, throw your host a bone, man. Like give them what
Mhm.
they need, make their job easy. That's benefit B, by the way. Podcast producers and hosts and creators, like it's rarely the only thing that they do. Rarely. Maybe Lewis, but it's rarely the only thing that they do. And therefore, the demands on their time, because you know what, podcasting, not a get rich quick scheme, not even remotely. So typically it's part of a multi-hyphenate strategy, if you will, James. So make their life easier. They're doing this over and over again. Give them the questions that you want to be asked. If you don't go that far, I certainly did not give you the questions that I wanted to be asked, James, but I did send you an outline because
Mhm.
it's not your job to anticipate what I'm going to know. So it is my job, if I want to create value for your audience, it's my job to say, hey, here's what I know. Here's a good outline if you want to run through this generally. What's your thought on that, though? I know not everybody feels the same way.
I think it is invaluable, especially if you're running into an inexperienced host,
A
because
hundred
you
percent.
just provided them the backbone on how to best present you, your presentation, your methodology, your process, your approach. You've done a lot of the work for them. Now, like for me, your outline, like that's helpful. That's great. All right, good. Had you not sent me this, like I've done 1,000+ shows, like I'm gonna find something to talk about. But that's just once again getting into my audience's head, and I just kind of ask what I think they would be curious about, which is often what I would be curious about. But not every host is like that. And there are times when I can't think of what to say or where to guide this, or maybe I'm reading this wrong or hearing this incorrectly. So if there's an outline or at least some structure, yeah, that's going to help me out a lot.
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. One is I'm being interviewed on a gentleman's show next week, and I don't know him. I've never spoken to him before. He contacted me, and I liked his idea, and so I'm going to jump on the air with him. Okay,
Mhm.
today I sent him, ask me these 6 questions, and here are the main ideas I'm going to use to answer them. If this does not align with what you're thinking, let me know.
Yep.
That, I got to be honest with you, James, that's great for him. It is 10 times better for me.
Mhm.
I have no idea what I'm walking into, so I'm going to lay the groundwork to the best of my ability, you know?
It sets you up on the best stage possible. And I want to branch off that, which is as a guest, how are we able to best leverage a show? Because we can go out and we can be on, like a shotgun approach and be on 20 podcasts in the next, 60 days, but it doesn't mean it's going to achieve that secondary goal that we set for ourselves, which is maybe we wanted more brand authority, maybe we wanted to grow our email list, maybe we wanted to generate more leads. What can we do as guests to best set ourselves up so that we can leverage these features that we're earning?
Okay. I have a lot to say about this because there is something going on in the ether right now, and I'm not happy about it. And it is, you will have someone on the air, you will deliver a kick ass show, have rapport with them. Everything's great, everything's coming up roses. And then they don't promote their appearance except to maybe reshare one of your Instagram things in their stories. Do you know how many people
Mhm.
see stories? 11 people see stories. 11 people see an Instagram story. I don't care how many followers you have. I'm not impressed with the number of people that will be revealed to. Okay. Now, I'm not just a creator and someone who is frustrated by that as a host. And I understand people are busy and it's your job as a host to make it easy for them to share. And that's another show. But as a guest, you are missing a trick. Like, you are only hurting you unless you didn't like the show. But can
Mhm.
we just suppose that you liked the show and that you were showcased in a way that makes you happy and you believe you created value? Okay. If that's true, I have a tip for you that is going to set you apart from the masses instantly. And that is, act like it's your podcast. For a
Mm.
moment, act like it is your podcast. So, James, when you send me this link and I have the privilege and the honor of saying that I was a guest on your show, James, I am going to act like it is my podcast. And I'm going to ask myself, if this were my podcast, where am I sharing this? By the way, you don't need to have a podcast for this to work for you. Okay. If you're acting like it's your podcast, ask, where would I share it? Share the actual episode, share the link, right? To make it easy for listeners to listen to it. And don't just say, I was just on James's show. Nobody cares. I was just on Beyond the Image. Here's the link. Nobody cares. Everybody's too busy to care unless they love you so much that they'll listen to everything you do, and
Mhm.
or they love James so much they will listen to anything and everything he does, right? And those people exist. But for most people, add a takeaway, add a highlight, add something that you shared on the air. I've never shared the James Clear story before and named names, never done that before. When I share this show, I will say, oh, listen to me out one of the most well known authors of our time, and then I trash his episode. Like, I will share a teaser or a highlight or a takeaway so that people are obviously curious and tune in. What you'll see the masses do, and why you want to separate yourself if you want to be top 2%, is they will just do a reshare and maybe post a link. And that's not doing anybody any good. And one of the, sorry, soapbox, but this is important, this content is a commercial for who you are and what you do. If you
Mhm.
did it well, you have provided what is very commonly evergreen content that can be repurposed for you in a myriad of ways. And you are missing a trick if all you do is the barest minimum. And I'll breathe, but I do want to share a couple of very specific things that I recommend.
Okay, I want to highlight on something you said, and then we'll get to your examples. Because let's say we're talking in the concept of earned media, that you're earning the right to be on these shows by your pitch and your approach. To rely solely on the authentic lead gen or funnel that is triggered by that, yeah, you could do that and you can move on to the next one, move on to the next one. But now you're spending a lot of time and energy finding the next podcast, trying to pitch to that podcast for minimal results, where you can take each one of these and try to amplify these results by doing these things. And one of the examples, you gave is like this idea of like posturing yourself as if it's your own show. Listen, I have X number of followers on social media. Maybe they listen to my shows, maybe they don't. But if I'm sharing that, let's assume I was a guest on your show, and I'm saying, listen, on this show, here's what I talked about. Here's what I shared on this other show, and I really hope you check it out. Here's the link where you can just click and be able to check that out. There could be people in my own ecosystem who were on the fence of working with me, and it was that piece of information or that story or that anecdote that I put out on your show that built enough resonance and trust and rapport that they're like, you know what? I've been thinking about working with James. Let me take action with them. Let me parallel this. Let's say I did a sponsored media post. So like I paid to be in, I don't know, Forbes magazine. I paid for like a sponsored one page feature in Forbes magazine. Well, yeah, I might get some media or some lead generation from that. But if I took that one page and then
Mm.
I blasted that out to my audience and I'm leveraging that, now I'm amplifying the media presence that I could have with this feature that I paid for. And we're paying for features whether or not it's a financial transaction. I had to spend the time and the money and the energy to get to know you, to build a relationship with you, to get to know your podcast, to be on your podcast, to record that episode. That is an investment. So why are we not capitalizing on this investment?
Well, actually, I think 2 reasons, probably more, but here are 2 that jump to mind. I think people sometimes get cringy and critical of themselves, and I'm not talking
Mm.
about the bigger players and the authors and the
Mhm.
celebrities and that sort of thing, but I actually think people are not always comfortable putting themselves out there. So let's say you have a photographer on your show and they have to put themselves out there to market their work, right? But blasting them, their face and their voice and 30 minutes of their time, like, I think some people are scared. So that is something I did not appreciate because I don't have that gene, but it's not something that I appreciated until I started witnessing a pattern. And so now I sort of preempt that. Okay. The
Mhm.
second reason is I think a lot of people are like, yeah, my people already know, like, and trust me, and they've already heard me. And so why do they care about hearing me on your show? That's a real thing. And here's what I would say to that. If you, let's say you have, I'm just going to use round numbers because it's easy. Let's say you have 10,000 social media followers, right? And you're like,
Mhm.
I don't want to distract them with somebody else's platform. Plus, they've already heard everything I have to say, blah, 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 blah. Okay. First of all, nonsense. Secondly, this can be used so effectively to reach new people, which is how we describe growth. Okay. Because this, you can ask for the transcript from the episode or make it yourself, right? You can convert that into a blog. You can put that on your website and then backlink to the show you're on. This is so SEO friendly. This is something you didn't even have to write. You just had to refine it. And all of a sudden you have this long form blog post, or you create 5 out of one episode. You get the idea, right? But the other thing is you can put this on your media page or in your media kit. And James, this is
Mhm.
your territory, but if I am pitched, if somebody wants to be on my show and they say, I've already been featured on these shows, I'll be honest with you, that does matter to me because it shows me
Carries
that they're
weight.
not brand new. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's not because I don't need you to have a huge social media presence to be on my show. Okay. I can tell you why if you care, but that's not important to me. But when I see that this is not the first time you've spoken into a microphone before, that gives me some confidence. Also, it shows me that when I give you my real estate, that you will reciprocate because I'm paying attention to how you share your other appearances.
I almost to a almost to an aggressive level will not work with individuals who I feel are only in it for themselves.
Yeah,
I
and you can
understand.
smell it.
You kinda can. I understand that earned media is it is about someone or, leveraging another person's platform. I get that. I'm okay with that. Like, an author wants to come on and pitch their book, or someone has a new show dropping. I understand that. But if we cannot find a mutual benefit in this, if this is all about you and your audience, and the example I used, like, I own several magazines, and when someone comes to us and almost desperately wants to be in our magazine or one of them, but then will never help promote the feature, you were just in it for yourself. And that is a very I'll give a quick anecdote. I was in New York meeting with the top photo director of one of the biggest publishing houses in the country. And he was flipping through my portfolio and I came across a photo of someone that I've worked with a lot who I've unfortunately had some bad fallouts with because they kept ruining relationships with media.
Mm.
So I haven't worked with this person in a long time. Won't say their name. Doesn't matter. This was 10 years ago. But he comes across this photo and he says, do you still work with this person? Now, I don't know his experience with this person. I don't know if, he loves them or what. And I don't want to step on anything. So I very PC say, I don't work with them as much as I used to. And he leaned back in his chair. He crossed his arms, says, fucking hate that person. I was like, "Whoa, whoa!" And he shared several examples of his experiences with this person that were almost identically mirrored to mine. It says every time she comes up for one of our
Mm.
covers, I walk up to the board and I rip her photo down. She will never be featured, and they own like 10 magazines. She'll never be featured in one of our books again as long as I work here. Okay, that is what we're trying to avoid. Now, that's an extraordinarily extreme example. So when you do even a little bit of reciprocation and collaboration and embracing the mutual benefit of what an earned media platform can do for all parties,
Mm.
that gets noticed so much. It's so refreshing as a host.
Well, and I gotta be honest with you, James, it's so short-sighted not to leverage this and optimize this for your own work. If you want to be
Mhm.
entirely self-serving, right? If that's your jam, then you're missing an absolute trick here because this is evergreen content that can be repurposed in a number of ways. And that's not what motivates me. What motivates me, like I said, is building community. It's actually about relationship for me. I find that that is how I want to move the needle. Great, fine. But at the end of the day, this is another asset that demonstrates your credibility, your ability to convey a message, and you are missing a trick if you do not treat it like it is your own and then act accordingly.
Yep, 100%. You mentioned there were a few other pieces that you wanted to share for leveraging. I just want to make sure I didn't skip over those.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, actually, I've touched on most of them. Getting that transcript and converting it into a blog is great
That's
if that,
such a good
if
idea.
that aligns with you. Yeah. By the way, I've never done it. So just so you know, that occurred to me about 3 interviews ago, and I was like, I need to be doing that. So I just want to let you all know I'm a complete hypocrite who's also a work in progress. But just 2 things I'm dying to say to the world. One is have a call to action at the end, make it
Mhm.
very short. And secondly, when the host asks you where you like to be found or whatever it is you say, where you're supposed to respond with, your platforms. Oh my God, James, have you ever had anyone do this to you? Well, I'm at www.onairella.com. I've actually had them spell out the 3 W's, which is my favorite thing. And then they'll list all 5 of their social handles and their
Yep.
website, blah, 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 blah. Nobody cares. I implore you, keep it really, really short. If you generated interest, people will find you, and your host will make it easy for them to do so in the show notes.
Because they'll link it in the show notes. Speaking of show notes, you had an awesome gift for our listeners, which is the Better Guest handout, which is kind of a breakdown on how to show up the best when you are a guest on a show. And I'm going to make sure. So first off, thank you for sending that over, and I'm going to make sure that's linked in the show notes. And speaking of which, Ella, where can listeners go to learn more about you and the amazing things you're doing?
I appreciate that. I am on air with Ella everywhere. You will not have trouble finding me.
Perfect. It's such a delight to have you on. You're one of those individuals I can chat with you for hours. So appreciate you taking the time to jump on and really hope that we can have you back on soon.
It is truly my pleasure. And thanks for joining us in this conversation.